Hi, welcome to Behind the Baton. It's a great honor for me to have with us today for a conversation John Rockwell. John, among the most distinguished critics ever, writer of many books, arts administrator. I knew him from reading him in the New York Times for many, many years. And then when he was the first director of the Lincoln Center Festival, I watched you with amazement at how much knowledge and expertise you brought to that festival. And of course, numerous books, like 5 books, 4 or 5 books, all the incredible reviewing of pop music as well as dance. I mean, it's a tremendous background. So I'm somewhat intimidated here talking to my friend.
It's all right.
But I thought we'd focus a little bit today on classical music criticism. John and I were talking, the word classical is an imperfect term, of course, but what do you want, pop music, you have jazz.
Well, it's vague too if you want to apply classical music to Haydn and Mozart rather than the whole range.
That's right.
You could also say music in the classical tradition is another way of doing it.
Anyway, so let's focus on your role as a classical music critic, because you've had so many roles. We'll get to some of the others, I hope, as well. So what do you think your role is as a critic? So you're writing reviews, whether it be for the Times or the Financial Times or whatever. What do you think the role of the critic is?
Well, your first allegiance is to yourself and to your readers, and also to the art of music. It's not to advance the career of anybody who you liked or like personally. It's not to destroy those persons, but it's to try to broaden and deepen the appreciation of classical music amongst your readers. And to do that, you have to be true to yourself. You can't let other factors like struggling local companies that you want to see succeed and therefore you give them a free pass even though they're not so great. I mean, that's a bad news. I mean, you got to be honest in your opinion. You don't have to be mean, but you have to be honest.
But do you think that, just on that point, do you find being a critic in New York, where there is so much activity, musical activity, compared to almost any other city in the country, where in fact, if you're not a cheerleader to a certain extent for the local orchestra, it could be detrimental to that local orchestra. What's the balance? You want to be true to yourself, you want to be true to the art. If it's not going well, if they don't sound good, if the conductor isn't so good, or whatever. On the other hand, you want to support the institution that exists in that community.
Well, I mean, that may be true if you're in Cleveland, where the Cleveland Orchestra is the big kahunga in terms of classical music. But it's not true in New York. I mean, in other words, one lets the chips fall where they may when it comes to the New York Philharmonic. Mind you, it should be pointed out that this discussion that you're initiating here the terms have changed in the last 10 plus years. The emphasis now on the internet more than print, but also look at the New York Times, which is the paper of record. When I was at the New York Times, I have not been a regular classical music critic on the New York Times since 1991. And we used to review almost everything, including all these horrible debut recitals and what was then
or wonderful debut recitals.
Well, mostly horrible. But the chief critics in those days, Harold Schoenberg, Don Hanahan, and so forth, wanted them all covered. They felt it was the duty of the Times. And the Times stopped covering them years ago. But now the number of reviews has sharply declined. And so therefore a classical music critic for the New York Times now writes as many previews and 5 things to see this weekend and feature articles and as reviews. The top critics write big reviews. And so the whole game has changed since I was a classical music critic.
Who do you think you say you write, you write for your readers. Who are they? Do you have any?
Well, that's another issue.
I was, so.
Well, no, but that's another issue. Obviously, professionals, even when they claim they do not read their reviews, do. But in New York, you're writing for a sophisticated music audience. I never personally had much interest in trying to broaden classical music to poor neighborhoods and so forth and so on. I mean, I think classical music is wonderful, and I think people can come to it and develop an enthusiasm for it, and in the school should be given the opportunity to hear it, and blah, 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 blah. But I don't have to beat the drum for classical. I mean, for example, when I was a classical music critic for the New York Times, we reviewed the opera. Very soon after I went off to become European culture correspondent and Lincoln Center Festival and all those things, they started, obviously somebody began to insist that any review of a new opera or of a new production of an opera had to include 2 or 3 paragraphs telling you the plot. And
why?
Why? Because they're trying to appeal to audiences that don't really are not as sophisticated. And
it doesn't matter. I mean, so you're reviewing an opera, you're reviewing the performance, you're reviewing the staging, you're reviewing the sets, you're reviewing the costume, you're reviewing the lighting, you're reviewing the conductor, you're reviewing the quality of the singing. Is it really necessary to tell the story?
If you're aiming a little lower than we used to aim. In other words, if you're aiming for a broader audience, they're trying to involve people who don't know the plot of Die Meistersinger. They, you know, the editors or somebody felt that those should be informed. I personally never had much use for that, and I now write a lot about opera for the Financial Times and for Opera Magazine, and of course we never tell the plot because it's assumed that our readers who are sophisticated know it. And one of the reasons that I was attracted to work for the New York Times back in the early 70s was that I wanted that sophisticated audience. But that's not necessarily true out in the hinterlands. I mean, it's true for Chicago, for San Francisco, to some extent LA, etc. You know, I like writing for the New York Times because I could just say what I thought and assume that there were interested people out there who knew enough to either think I was a fool or I was brilliant or whatever they thought, but they had an opinion, which was a countervailing opinion to my opinion, rather than sheep being led to slaughter. And so your audience question is simple. I would like to write for a sophisticated audience.
And we'd like to play for a sophisticated audience. I mean, you know,
Right.
the great thing is what you want is a large, knowledgeable, enthusiastic audience. If you
Right.
give a good performance, of course. The reduction of arts coverage in newspapers throughout the country, of course, has been quite staggering. I mean, I remember when I was in Seattle, we had 3, 4 publications reviewing every concert. But when I left, and not because of me, but we had none.
Oh, you drove them out. But I mean, seriously, back in New York, 100 years ago, there were 8 or 10 major reviews of opera premieres.
Well, if you read as I have, and I'm sure you have too, the Mahler biography, you see that he would get 15, 20 reviews for one concert from the Brooklyn papers and the Staten Island and the Queens, and
Right.
I mean, it was extraordinary.
I think Harold Schomburg started on the Brooklyn Eagle, for example, but maybe not. But I think he had some connection to it.
I think so, yeah.
But in any event, no, sure. I mean, the change has been dramatic, and
Why is that
well,
happening?
technological. It has nothing to do with necessarily with music.
But
It
the
has,
New York Times still has an art. I mean, they don't have a sports section except on, I think, Mondays and.
they have a sports section every day.
No, they have that's in the back.
They
of the
don't have a
business page.
freestanding
Free,
sports
but they have
section.
a freestanding art section every day.
Yeah.
But why wouldn't they have more music criticism?
Well, because they don't get enough clicks.
Is that really the reason?
Yeah, I mean, I think that sure, but
Or is it because maybe the editors don't care? I'm not the music editor. I mean, the journalists don't
I
care
mean,
as much
Abe
about it.
Rosenthal, when he was the editor of the Times, said, "I want to see a review of the concert I went to last night on my breakfast table the next morning." And so that's when we all would schlep back to the Times at 11 at night, and most music critics had never heard the last act of any Wagner opera because they had to leave at the end of the penultimate act. But that all changed, and it's gradually evolved. But all papers now have less interest in serious arts reviews, but whether it's dance or
Dance test doesn't seem, I mean, in the New York Times, the dance doesn't seem to have suffered the way music has. Am I wrong about that?
I think you're wrong, and I also think that, I mean, I don't know, I had lunch, I mean, I was the dance critic
I know.
between Kisselhoff and Hawley, and I had lunch with Alice there a month or so ago, and I was, because everybody wanted to know who's going to be his successor. And he said, well, there was some talk around the paper of not having a successor. You know, they have all these people like Gia Corliss and Rosalind Sulkus and Brian, whatever his name is, Siebert, and Siobhan Burke, and a bunch of others. And the idea was simply that the dance editor would farm out the reviews as needed without having a chief critic. I think that's a bad idea,
I think so,
but
too.
it proves that dance has always been sort of a stepchild of the serious arts in American newspapers. I mean, in most newspapers, even now, dance is covered by the classical music critic. That was true when I was at the Oakland Tribune and the Los Angeles Times. But serious arts, especially reviews, editors never got why one should want to read a review of something that's not going to be repeated. Therefore, they're happy with film reviews and with theater reviews and even dance reviews that have long runs, or opera reviews that are in repertory for at least a few weeks.
Well, I mean, clearly it's not about selling tickets, it's, generally speaking, but it's about excitement and enthusiasm for the art in general. I mean, quite frankly, when you have whatever newspapers it may be, writing about something, you know, the expression, you know, better that they write about you badly than not write about you at all. I never thought that was really true. I always thought, I'd rather, if it's going to be a bad review, please don't run it, you know. But after, you know, in those days in Seattle, when all of a sudden we had two dailies that were reviewing everything, and then my last year or so, there were no reviews, and there was no discussion, and there was no...
Well, Campbell and
Barkley
right.
were both reviewing, and they were fighting for articles and making the case. You couldn't get away with anything, you know, it was why, it was
Well,
really
I mean,
quite
the
wonderful.
serious arts are in trouble with newspapers in America today, and that's partly economic, partly cultural. You know, I mean, everybody is. I feel vaguely guilty about this because, you know, when I arrived at the New York Times in 1972 and continued reviewing classical music, but also reviewing rock and roll, I felt that I was opening up music to include these others. Now these other forms have taken over and have muscled classical music aside in terms of newspaper coverage.
Well, they've always been much more popular, and the numbers have been extraordinary.
Yeah, I know, but the readers or the editors of the New York Times or the business people of the New York Times feel that they're getting more response from the readers who are interested in pop music than they are in.
So there's always talk about the declining audience, and certainly in certain cities the audience is growing. In certain cities it's declining.
I mean, I remember one of my favorite stories along those lines. Remember Bruce Crawford? Bruce Crawford was head of BBD&O International, or some big advertising agency, but he was also chairman of the board and for a while general manager of the Met, and not bad either. He's a very smart guy. And somebody asked him once, "Don't you worry that the Met audience is so old?" And he said, "The Met audience has always been old." You know, so
actually, the audiences for symphonic music is younger now.
yeah, and I think the worry about these old audiences is that their children are not necessarily, they're certainly not subscribing. You know, subscriptions all across the board have gone down in favor of single ticket purchases, which tends to mean less attendance.
And also more expensive advertising, because you know, the concerts have to be promoted individually.
Well, I mean, when I edited Arts and Leisure, the Sunday art section at the New York Times, I mean, we were kept alive by the newspaper, by the movie ads, but there were also an enormous amount of classical music ads, and that's declined sharply as well. People advertise online, and the online ad rates are lower than the print rates. I'm sure they're trying to bring them more into balance, but nonetheless, the New York Times is struggling to break even on a quarterly basis just because of the decline of print ads.
Well, you know, of course, you look at the Met, where everyone's talking about how they used to sell 90%, and now they're selling 70%, whatever the numbers may be.
And a lot of those are discounted tickets too.
And so why has that? Do you think the HD that they do in the movie houses has hurt their sales?
I think Peter Gelb has really opened a can of worms with those broadcasts. I mean, they're wonderful in many ways.
And they reach a
if
huge audience
and he
throughout the
could, and
country,
he
throughout
could
the
never
world.
do it now because it's established. But if he had started by making a 200-mile radius around New York in which you would not see the movies, it might have cut down on some of the tourist trade, but it would mean that people who live in Hudson, New York, would come into New York to buy tickets to see operas at the Met. Now they can go to their local movie theater and do.
Yeah.
And
Well, on the one hand, you as an artist, you want to say you want to reach as large a possible audience as you can, and so you're thrilled about the incredible reach that these broadcasts have, and they are by and large terrific, and it's very exciting to see, and you can see it all over the world, really. As you know, in the football world, I think you probably know that there were many teams that wouldn't allow local broadcasts of
Sure.
their games unless they were sold out.
Right.
Then they would allow the local broadcasts. So on the one hand, you want to see you're bringing great art to the masses for very little money, but maybe you're hurting your home team.
it's a real tricky question.
But I think it also hurts other home teams. So, for example, let's say in a small opera house, Kansas City, I'm making this up, they do whatever they do, 4 or 5 productions a year, they're very successful. Well, they can get 6 performances in their local movie house with good sound and good of the Met. So are they going to hurt the locals?
Yeah, the
as
answer
well?
is probably yes. And I mean, there was also a controversy often initiated by me about the Met tour. I mean, of course, there's the Met radio broadcast. And you have all kinds of singers who say, I was in Tuscaloosa, and when I was 9, I heard Leontine Price, and I wanted to be an opera singer. And you know, I don't dispute that at all. But then there was the annual spring tour, which was, you know, people would get on a train, and back in 100 years ago, famous singers, Caruso, etc., would go on these tours, but they kept going for until about 20 or 30 years ago. And I wrote an article once, which they hated at Opera News, which is the house organ of the Met, arguing just what you were suggesting, that the presence of the Met tours, all the high society in Kansas City, I don't know why we're dumping on Kansas City, but nonetheless,
We like Kansas City.
well, Virgil Thompson's hometown, but
right.
nonetheless, you know, the high society of those towns would sit on their hands for all year, and then they do incredible gala dinners and stuff when the Met came to town, and they didn't support the local opera company, which struck them as hopelessly
Right.
provincial. But when the Met tour ended, there was an efflorescence
Right.
of these local
Well,
opera
it happened the
companies.
same way in Milwaukee when the Chicago Symphony would do a whole series. They'd do 6 concerts, 8 concerts a year. Everybody would wait for the Chicago Symphony, and then the Milwaukee, who cares about that? Then they stopped, and all of a sudden, Milwaukee happens to be a fine orchestra, and they're servicing their community very well.
Well, I mean, you know, so there's pluses and minuses
Yeah.
to the films, to the HGTV broadcasts, to the tours, to even the radio broadcasts. But on the whole, I do think you're right that as an artist, you want to see more people see your stuff. And so, you know, on the whole, I admire Peter Gelb for trying to be the pioneer of that kind. I mean, every opera company and symphony orchestra in the world now has copied that.
Sure.
But the Met is the...
Well, it's very hard to make symphony orchestras as lively and exciting as
As
an
opera.
opera
No.
performance.
No, it's true. I
But what
mean-
about the? You know, what strikes me so much is that, I mean, how can you? Well, there are ways to fight it, but that the cost is so high. Now the Met will
Cost
say
of what?
of going to the opera.
Ah.
The Met will say we have $25 tickets, and I know they do. They're very few, and they're not.
They're often very good too, but you don't know, you can't plan your life, and you have to go at the last
it's
minute.
very inexpensive to go to the symphony. I mean, and of course, we all know it only represents maximum 50% of the cost of putting things on. I understand all of that, but you know, what you really want to do is have more people appreciate it, more people be exposed, and I mean, I believe anyway that cost is a huge factor in
Well,
people not attending.
you're of course right, and there's various ways of solving it. Some rich lady at the New York Philharmonic gave the Philharmonic a chunk of change and said that any ticket you don't sell, she'd buy, as it were, essentially, you know. So they would, the Philharmonic was so disingenuous. they would say, we're always sold out. Always. And they were. Every seat was paid for. But you'd go to the concerts and it would be 2/3 full.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's still true. And so one scenario is to have a rich person subsidize, not just donate, but subsidize ticket sales.
Right.
I think, of course, the other solution is public support, which in multicultural America, with people hysterical about taxes and all that, is not likely to happen. But is the explanation. If you go to Europe, ticket prices are way more modest. I remember going to Dennis Davies did the trilogy of the 3 glass portrait operas in Stuttgart back in the early 80s. The thing was totally sold out. All young people, who'd gotten in for modest prices. It was thrilling just to see how music in the classical tradition could appeal to young people in a way that it can't here because they can't afford it and they aren't educated in it and they don't know anything.
Let's go to another subject now, one that you're very familiar with because of your tremendous broad knowledge of, and that is about repertoire. So let's talk about orchestras because that's my world, if you don't mind. Orchestras, of course, have an incredible history of thousands of really great pieces to play by many, many, many great composers. And when you're planning a season, whether it's the New York Philharmonic or the Dallas Symphony or whatever, you really want to give a broad spectrum of repertoire from, let's say, Bach and Handel to Mozart to Wagner to Stravinsky, and move into the 21st century. There's a limited amount of ability to do all that because you can't do everything. I remember one year, David Baton was complaining about programming not enough new music, and we would work with the Chamber Symphony, and I said, okay, let's do the season together. And we did the season. Well, these are the soloists, and this is what they want to play. And these are we have to do a little Beethoven, maybe a little Mendelssohn. And and that's great. He loves this piece. And we went through the whole thing. And then in the end, we had a few slots to try to do something of more imaginative nature. And we still, of course, we did them, and we did a lot of things there. But the exercise was just the reality of having to try to figure out a way to program all this material. Then, in many places, we started doing new music series, which I thought were really good. Boulez did it here in New York, and of course Alan Gilbert did it. I think they probably still do it. Because you get a chance to really, what Boulez said when he was doing that series was, I'm going to do repertoire that's interesting, blah, 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 and something that's really successful I'm going to then bring and play it in the big hall. And remember, we used to do them down at the Cooper Union in those days. So what do you do? How do you integrate? How do you choose? I mean, when you did the Lincoln Center Festival, it's different. The reason for that festival was to do imaginative things in theater and dance and music. I'm talking about a traditional symphony orchestra. What's the balance, do you think? And how should it be done?
Look, let's go at it from a slightly different direction. There were you and David Diamond and your few remaining slots. The only way to make contemporary music work in a symphony concert is to make it something that people are actually excited about and look forward to. Mm-hmm. If it's, oh my God, here's this horrible, boring, unlistenable piece of 15 minutes, and worse yet at the end, because at the end we can leave, right? But if it's at the beginning, they have to sit through it before they get to their Beethoven. But, the LA Philharmonic is sort of the poster child right now of how to handle contemporary music. I mean, they have the Red Cat series and their smaller chamber stuff, but they also program a lot of new music, American and European, in the context of their regular programs. And they get people like Adams and Salonen and so forth to come in and program those things. Salonen, of course, when he was music director, but Adams as regularly as a kind of and then MTT, Michael Tilson Thomas in San Francisco, did his Maverick series. The idea is to get people excited in this music. I mean, I come from California, and the tradition of interesting contemporary music in California over the last 100 plus years is enormous, the amount of stuff that goes on, or went on. and it's continuing to go on. And so when you get somebody like Yuval Sharon in L.A., who is now helping and Peter Sellers are helping to program stuff at the LA Philharmonic, I mean, people turn out because they want to hear it. They're not hearing it out of duty. And so, to me, the solution, and we'll see what Deborah Borda can cook up at the New York Philharmonic now, having spent 17 years overseeing that evolution of that orchestra in that kind of programming in LA. So, to do it out of duty, and the other issue is this whole uptown downtown thing back when, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, when so much of the new music that was coming out was very hard to listen to by the average music lover. It was dissonant, it was off-putting to them. Schoenberg is still the devil in most people's ears. They flee when they hear his name.
If you get them to come at all.
Right. And so, but to make it, the music has opened up a bit, not in terms of namby-pamby neo-romanticism, but interesting experimental stuff. And when people get excited about that, then they'll start seeking out new music rather than suffering through it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's all, of course, fascinating. Why do you think the history of 20th century American music, I shouldn't say history, the works that I've loved so much are so rarely played? You know, the William Schumann's,
Well, I think that's a good question. I mean, you and Slacken and a few other people who have championed that music have done a noble job. I mean, I think there's a lot of that music is worth hearing more or worth hearing at all. Some of it is a little.
Well, let me interrupt you for a second. If you look at the cross section of 20th, 21st century jazz, as I've said on my show, you look at what Winton does at Wynton Marsalis does at Jazz Lincoln Center. He embraces Jelly Roll Morton or Art Tatum, as well as he will embrace Ornette Coleman or Duke Ellington or Cecil Taylor. I mean, all these different desperate kind of styles. And he, in a sense, he's dealing with the history of jazz every year, all the time. And you look at most orchestras in this country, and we ignore most American music of the 20th century, except for, of course, Gershwin and Bernstein.
Yeah, but there's there are a couple of answers to that. One is that there's no overwhelming, countervailing force of European music in jazz. In other words, if you're dealing with the history of jazz, you are dealing with American music.
You have no choice.
Whereas you in Seattle or wherever, had Beethoven and Mendelssohn and Mahler and all those people that you had to get into the mix.
True.
And so that, by definition, squeezed out a lot of the, the historical. So, I mean, I'm an admirer of a lot of that music, but a lot of it strikes me as less interesting than others, I mean, but to get a chance to hear it with some regularity, I would think that just like out on the West Coast when they did these Mavericks festivals in San Francisco or the various programs that Adams curated in LA, they made it into a kind of festival and people wanted to do it. And if I'd been in your shoes and if you could get the board to agree, I would think that doing an actual short-term 2-week festival, not in the subscription series, but of your kind of guys, Thompson with a P and
well, I did exactly that. I did. I mean, just as an aside, I did a 2-week festival of the history. I mean, the early 20th century. Whether it be Arthur Foote or Edward McDowell, moving forward to Peter Menon and William Schumann and so forth. But then, the next year, I did a 2-week festival of only living American composers. Because to me, that's the future, and that's crucially important.
Did the festival format and attendant publicity help with audience?
Well,
did people come out and hear it?
They sure did. They sure did. But remember, I've been there a lot of years, and they kind of trusted me. So they've heard a lot of American music, but we never told them that they were hearing a lot of American music.
What they think they were hearing? Bohemian music?
They were hearing music.
Yeah.
That wasn't specifically American.
Okay.
They just.
Did you include non-American composers in this
Oh,
these
always.
overviews?
Of course.
No, in these 2-week
Oh,
festivals.
yeah, we did a festival of Asian influenced music. We did a festival around South American music, which is very interesting to me because except for Villalobos and Hinastera and a few others,
Chavez, yeah.
Chavez, Hoodoo, and Revueltas, we don't know a lot. So for me, those festivals were what's going on in South America in terms of music.
The answer is a lot.
A lot. And
Yeah.
so then you start doing the research, and then we did a festival around that. I mean, those are, I think, all very valuable things. Anyway, for me, of course, it's really hard because for the smaller orchestras that have shorter subscription seasons, it's very hard to do that. But here in New York, when you talk about William Schumann, the fact that he was the president of Lincoln Center and the president of Juilliard, I mean, his pieces should be done regularly, and they're great symphonies, I found. In fact, Muti is doing the Ninth Symphony in Chicago.
How many are there?
Well, he actually wrote 10, but the first 2 he discounted, so there are 8, and they're all great, I think.
Anything to avoid the mystical Beethoven 9.
Anyway, John, it's just been a great joy talking to you. There's so much more to think about, to talk about, but I'm so grateful that you spent the time with us.
All right, well,
Really
thank you for
appreciate it.
having me.